But we're here for a serious reason as well, not just to enjoy what promises to be a lovely day, because we're discussing a topic which we know matters an awful lot to you at home from our inbox. The questions you raise, the subjects that you raise with us about water quality, the amount of sewage in our water. This morning we're going to hear from the water companies. We're going to hear from the Environment Secretary, Thérèse Coffey. We will hear from campaigners, and we'd love to hear from you as well. And we'll let you know how to get in touch with us throughout this morning's breakfast. Because we have a big BBC investigation today, it has found that what looks like the water companies illegally discharging raw sewage hundreds of times last year. Our team has seen analysis, they've looked at data from three of the largest water companies, Thames, Wessex and Southern Water. And it appears to show that on 400 spills last year, lasting thousands of hours, sewage was released not during wet weather, not during storms and heavy rain and snow, but during dry weather. This is something that our environment correspondent Jonah Fisher has been investigating.
It stinks, but is it legal? Raw sewage was released onto England's beaches and into its rivers more than 300,000 times last year. Some of it was allowed, but our analysis of water company data suggests they're regularly breaking the law. Rural West Sussex and one of southern England's celebrated chalk streams.
So here we are, welcome to the River Lavant, or as we locally call it, the River Lav.
The River Lav.
The River Lav, just full of effluent.
Rob, a retired businessman, is not joking. There would be no River Lavant in the summer without the treated discharges from the next door sewage plant.
When we came, it was overflowing, so we had the storm overflow coming out here, untreated sewage coming out here. And we came back a few days later, it was still going on. A few days later again, still going on.
Rob filmed what looks like a white fungus growing on the sewage slick. But why was it spilling? There was no rain on the day the flow began, or on any of the previous 3 days. Rob complained, the Environment Agency investigated, and though Southern Water was found to have broken the rules, it was only given a warning.
They treat it as a one-off, absolutely, whereas it had been going for probably 3 to 4 months and continued for 3 to 4 months afterwards. It is a scandal.
Over the last few years, the water companies have been forced by the government to report details of when and where they discharge raw sewage. It's only supposed to happen when the system is overwhelmed after heavy rainfall or snow. It's not supposed to take place, as it did here, during periods of dry weather.
So how common are these dry spills? To find out, the BBC requested details from all 9 English water companies. 3 of the largest complied, providing us with huge amounts of data. We then cross-referenced that with rainfall and found what looks like nearly 400 sewage spills, lasting thousands of hours, that started during dry weather.
Any spill that we can verify that's taken place during a dry spill condition would be illegal against the permit.
Many of the water companies, like Southern Water at the Lavant, say groundwater leaking into cracked pipes is behind some of the spills. Thames Water apologised for some of theirs. Wessex said some of the data they'd given us was flawed.
There should never be a dry spill, and any suggestion that there has been one should be investigated fully by the Environment Agency. But I think really enforcement is not the way we're going to fix the ultimate issue, which is to reduce and ideally eliminate sewage going into our rivers and seas, which is why we have unveiled an ambitious plan to triple investment so that we can tackle the root cause of the problem, which is an ageing system, a tired system, and a very large system.
The Environment Agency told us it's now working on its largest ever criminal investigation into water companies and their sewage spills. Jonah Fisher, BBC News.
Well, Jonah's with us on the sofa here in Langstone Harbour this morning. I know an awful lot of work has gone into this story. Do you want to just talk us through how you've done the research, how you've come up with these conclusions?
Yeah, the way this works is that water companies are required by the government to provide details of how many spills take place and where those spills take place. So every year they report that to the Environment Agency. What we don't see published is the granular detail of exactly when and where those spills took place, what day they started on, when did they finish. And that's important because though we may find it disgusting, spilling a mix of sewage and rainwater into the sea or into the river is not illegal. The water companies are allowed to do it if the system is going to be overwhelmed, if otherwise perhaps the sewage might be going to come back up into people's homes. They're not allowed to do it under the terms of the permits on these overflows if it's dry weather. So what we did is we requested the information from the water companies, freedom of information requests. 3 of the biggest English water companies got back to us with what was a huge amount of data. Then much cleverer people than myself crunched
Impossible.
that. Yeah, well, believe me, this was a massive spreadsheet, if you can imagine. Basically, they crunched the data, all of that data from the water companies. They combined it with data from the Met Office about when the rain had fallen. We adopted a much more generous parameters on this than the Environment Agency, so we could isolate when spills had taken place during periods of dry weather. And as you said there, we discovered just from these 3 water companies, there are 9 water companies who deal with sewage in the UK. It looks like that they have been spilling sewage during dry weather, well, somewhere in the region of 400 times last year.
And that's what we call dry spills, so it's released during dry weather.
Exactly, that's the important distinction here. If it's really, really wet, they're allowed to do it. We may not like it, but they can do it. If it is dry, under the terms of the law, under environmental protection law, they should not be doing it. It should be pointed out there are some reasons which they give for why it might be taking place that's unavoidable. There may be reasons why the Environment Agency, the regulator, decides not to prosecute. One of the biggest reasons given is groundwater, which is basically large amounts of water in the ground, effectively forcing its way into cracked pipes underground, which then, even during periods when it hasn't been raining, if there's a lot of groundwater in there, it may leak into the pipes and still contribute to overwhelming the system. So there are reasons behind it. There are reasons why the Environment Agency might decide not to take action in every single case, but it is illegal.
OK, we're going to get lots of reaction to this morning on BBC Breakfast, but what reaction have you got so far from presenting these findings?
Well, we've been speaking to everyone involved, as you'd expect, with the different water companies. As I just explained, you have various different explanations. One of them, Wessex said that, in fact, the data that they'd given to us, there were some issues with it. Thames Water, well, they apologised for some of the spills that we had highlighted taking place in London. We also spoke to the Environment Agency, who are the regulators here, effectively saying, did you know this was taking place? Are you aware? And they said, well, they can't say too much, but they're in the process of what they're calling their largest ever criminal investigation, which is looking generally at the issue of spills from water companies. So we may well hear more on that front.
Jonah, for now, thank you very much indeed. What a spot, hey? Isn't it
Incredible.
gorgeous? We've struck. In the meantime, we're asking this morning about the current state of our water and what's in it. And we're joined here on the sofa, live in Portsmouth. Good morning to both of you in the sunshine, by Rob Bailey, you're a citizen scientist, and Professor Alex Ford, who's, well, this is your home, isn't it? We're here at the University of Portsmouth on the roof today. But just tell us, what work do you do here?
We do marine environmental research that spans around the world, but more recently and unfortunately there's been a focus right on our doorstep, and as you can see, this is an amazing location for us to teach our students and hopefully generate the next generation of marine biologists and environmental scientists to help our planet.
Yeah, it's quite a classroom, isn't it? Certainly
Yeah,
this morning. I don't know whether I fancy it in February, but we're very glad we're doing this with you here this morning on a sunny day in September. Just talk me through what you talk about on your doorstep. What have you found in the water here, as an example?
Well, just this year there has been close to 1,000 hours of sewage discharges into this marine protected area right here. And the geology of this, or the hydrology of this place, it means that north of us there is the Southern Water's largest sewage treatment plant called Bud's Farm. When it rains, it can't cope with the sewage, and it discharges that straight into here.
Which is legal, which is kind of the way the system works.
Yeah, and one of the things I guess about today's story about dry spills is that if you're a fish, you don't really differentiate between legal spills and non-illegal spills. They're harmful to our wildlife irrespective.
And dry spill is when there's a release on a dry, sunny day like today. So in terms of what we're talking about, pollution and sewage, but it's not just sewage that you're concerned about, is it?
Yeah, that sewage contains many different chemicals, from pharmaceuticals, the detergents that we use in our washing machines and our dishwashers, all the shampoo, shower gels, all the things, the chemicals that come off our stain-proof clothing, our waterproofing from our frying pans and everything, these forever chemicals, they all come out with that sewage and unfortunately end up in our wildlife.
Rob, I described you as a citizen scientist because you and other local people go out and do your own analysis and your own research in the water.
That's right, yeah, I was a sea swimmer in these harbours, and the 5,000 acres you see here is just a third of it. It goes a lot further into Chichester Harbour. So I was a sea swimmer, and I've given up because of what we found in the water.
You don't swim anymore?
I don't swim anymore.
What have you found in the water?
Well, with Alex's help, I mean, we did a water monitoring programme looking at about 22 sites, taking about 350 samples, and our group has grown to about 40,000 people now, called the Clean Harbours Partnership. And we sponsored a scientific research study with Alex to look at what's in the water. And we found pharmaceuticals, recreational drugs, pesticides, probably between just over 50 of those.
Because it's sewage poo that gets the headlines and the attention and makes us all feel queasy. But I suppose there are things that we can all not throw down the toilet, which would at least improve some of that, yeah?
Absolutely, and as Alex is very good at saying, it's the things we can't see that does the damage. We're not really worried about the poo, in essence, it's what's in it. And obviously, as humans, we only digest part of what we put in our bodies.
Can you see a day when you'll be back in that water swimming again? Are you
I
confident?
really hope so. I'm not confident yet, but there seems to be the tide is turning.
I like what you did there. The tide is turning. That's you should come write the breakfast headlines for us. Alex, what about you in terms of the future? The water companies, the government say they're investing, they're making improvements, that in some places water quality's never been better. What do you say?
Well, I think they set their target at 2050, which is quite a long way away, and it would be better if that was done a lot quicker than they've suggested. And the other thing, the legislation where it says progressively reduce pollution, it would have been better if there was a more fixed target, because that gives the water companies a bit of a get-out-of-jail card, if you like, because as long as they show that they are progressively reducing, however small, that they are then compliant.
Thank you both for chatting to us. Thank you for having us here this morning on your roof.
Pleasure.
And we will hear from the water companies, from the Environment Agency, from Thérèse Coffey, the Environment Secretary, as the programme goes on. Lots more to come here on BBC Breakfast. So I've been out and about talking to swimmers and sailors on a day that wasn't quite as nice as today.
These landscapes, they're not ours. We walk through them for the duration of our lives and leave them for the next generation. When I walk on these marshes, I think of the Romans and the Tudors and the Victorians, and me with my hand in my father and mother's hand, and me with my children, and now me with my grandson. Is known
Even in the pouring rain, Kate Moss loves this stretch of coast. The reed beds of Fishbourne have inspired some of her best-selling novels. These creeks are where Kate played as a child, and she still lives nearby. But she tells me she can see the waterways changing because she says the sewers can no longer cope.
That's the treatment plant there, and you can see the overflow and you can see the grill, and at certain times you can see everything building up there waiting to be let out untreated into this beautiful Fishbourne channel.
Langstone Harbour, just round the coast in Hampshire. These pictures prompted a debate about sewage when we showed them on BBC Breakfast. At the time, Southern Waters said it was consented storm release and protected residents from potential flooding. Now they say it was treated sewage and the plant was operating correctly. But scientists and campaigners aren't convinced. At the local sailing club, these young mariners are horrified by what they sometimes see and smell.
You're swimming in poo and it might make you ill. When you go under and then you come up, sometimes a bit of water dribbles into your mouth, and when you figure out that that's poo, it's basically poo coming into your mouth.
It smells absolutely disgusting, and it looks like just a pile of murky, brown, disgusting goo.
They'll never know for sure if there's a link, but lots of them suspect the water has made them sick.
I come sailing on Langstone Harbour twice a week for my college course, and since we started the college course, every one of us has been ill at some point from capsizing on our boat and accidentally drinking the water.
I've been thinking about having a swim while I'm here, but now I'm not so sure. Claire tells me she goes twice a week, but she keeps away from the sewage works and avoids rainy days like today when there might be an overflow.
I won't swim for 72 hours after there's been a release, but if there hasn't, and on a normal dry summer's day, it's fine. But I do tend to go down onto Hayling Island Beach because I feel it's cleaner there than it is in the harbours, which is such a big shame.
So I'm all dressed up, got my wetsuit on. I know we talked about going for a swim, but I think I might leave it.
OK.
I think we'll find another spot. Locals like Bianca are so concerned about water quality here, they're now doing their own checks, paying a lab to test the water. What have you found in that water?
So we've got painkillers, we have got the pill, not even thinking about the cocaine, the MDMA and all the recreational drugs that we found in there, and then the pesticides and the things that are coming off agriculture.
For centuries, people here have lived their lives according to the tides and what the water does. Now they're thinking more about what that water contains. I've been speaking to the Environment Secretary, Thérèse Coffey, and to start with I asked her for her response to this BBC research suggesting that sewage is being released even on dry, sunny days.
Well, clearly when companies breach their permits, I fully expect the Environment Agency, who are the regulators, to make sure that those things are complied with and to investigate and take action where they're not being. Now, there'll be a variety of reasons the Environment Agency, I'm sure, can explain on why it may not be raining one day and yet there's still storm overflows. And some of that will be links going right through the network, what's happened with groundwater. But overall, one of the reasons that we introduced monitoring was that over a decade ago was to try and make sure that we were catching and understanding this when people's concerns were being addressed. And by the end of this year, every single storm overflow will be having that monitor and that information will be used.
It seems like even on the 19th of July last summer, which was the hottest day on record, the middle of a dry spell, that even then there was sewage being released illegally. I mean, you've talked about the Environment Agency. Do you also take your share of the responsibility for this?
Well, it does seem extraordinary on the hottest day of the year that there may be releases. But again, I go back to the fact the Environment Agency is the regulator. They will be the people who will do the detailed investigation and understanding of why all that has happened and what they're going to do about it in terms of, was it a breach, is there an explanation, or frankly, had the water companies literally dropped the ball and messed up? And in which case, that's why we've had a number of investigations increasing. There's also a wider point about water companies that they are all under a criminal investigation right now in a combination between themselves and Ofwat.
You say that water companies have to improve their storm overflows, stop them discharging into bathing water, for example, by 2035, 12 years' time. But this summer we've had swimming events cancelled, we've had Team GB triathletes unable to train. I've spoken to kids down on the south coast who say they're terrified about swallowing poo when they're in the water. 12 years' time, those kids could have children of their own. It's a long time that they have to wait, isn't it?
Well, we have the highest proportion of our bathing waters achieving excellent status. It's been at 72%, up from just over half just over 10 years ago. So we have seen improvements made, and we're also seeing more places becoming designated bathing waters. So in Langstone Harbour, just down the road at the Hayling Island, you'll see that the status is excellent for all the bathing waters that are being designated down there. Now, we still want to see improvements. Of course we do. We want to see improvements for people, we want to see improvements for nature. And that's why this systematic approach of a credible plan for water, where we're doing plans water body by water body, it does take time. We can see in the Thames, one of the dirtiest rivers that have been, we have seen regeneration of nature coming back in, but also the super sewer coming, which is taking 10 years to build and develop. It will be operational, I think, next year. But that has taken several £billion of investment, And some of these projects will just take time.
The Environment Water campaigner Fergal Sharkey has a question for you that he'd like an answer. If I could play this to you.
The question at the beginning of this: who in this room is utterly unhappy and thinks government's policy towards the environment and the protection of our rivers has failed? Feel free to raise your hand. Secretary of State, 12 years ago, 25% of our rivers were in good ecological status. That's now 14. Your own data tells me that's going to be 6 by 2027. Why and how did you ever allow that to happen?
What I would say back to Fergal is that I want to see continuous improvement. But if I go back to 2008, 70% of our rivers were in good ecological status. The goalposts have shifted. We quite rightly wanted more stringent assessment of that. And since then, we've also got more stringent ways of actually doing the monitoring and the measuring. But at the same time, what has improved is that we are now seeing that 3/4 of all the measures in order to try and achieve good status is being achieved. That's a substantial increase from where we were. And the way that the regulations work, you have 20 different factors. If one of them fails, everything fails.
You've talked about billions of pounds worth of investment to make things better. But I suppose at the end of the day, it's going to be our viewers, the customers, whose bills go up and pay for that, isn't it? I mean, reports this summer that bills could go up by 40% in the next 5 years. Is that likely? Is that the kind of sum we're talking about?
We're still going through a process, and Ofwat is the independent regulator who makes that judgment, and we've always been careful, regardless of the colour of government, to make sure we get that balance between investment but also the cost to households. So we want to make sure that we are getting good value for money for consumers, but also the necessary investment to make these changes. The message is very clear from the public. They're fed up of the sewage. I am too. But we are going to have that extra investment to make sure it gets delivered. And that's why our storm overflow plan itself alone is over £56 billion and is likely now to be higher.
We've been talking to people in parts of True Blue, Sussex and Hampshire as part of this BBC Breakfast Sewage special. And some of them have described the Conservative Party as the party of sewage. This is politically, electorally, potentially toxic for you, isn't it, this subject?
I think it's really a very difficult issue. I'm not pretending otherwise, but actually we're the party that's cleaning it up. Bathing waters have got far cleaner since we've been in power. We've got the monitoring going. That's how we're able to uncover the scale of the issue that we're tackling. We're also the party that is making sure that we're going to get more investment into the water companies and into the water infrastructure. And that is something where we have a credible plan, water body by water body, that we will be doing to make sure that we continue to improve the cleanliness of our water, because rivers are cleaner than they have ever been.
Thérèse Coffey, thank you.
Thank you.
That interview was yesterday afternoon at DEFRA in London. Fergal Sharkey is still with me. You know, the thing that struck me talking to the Secretary of State was that she kept saying, look, this isn't easy, and that maybe we all think that there is a magic switch or you know, a couple of billion quid and it can all be sorted. Do you accept this is really complicated?
Not in the least, because by the way, this has been going on for decades. They've had 30 years to get this right. The target the Secretary of State referred to, by 2027, the original legal target was 100% of our rivers would be in good ecological status. We now know it's going to be 6. What you're looking at is actually 3 decades of a failure of political oversight, a failure of regulation, and 3 decades of water companies gaming the system to their benefit.
But given where we are, do you admit it's not easy?
Listen, everything in the world can be fixed. It simply takes the vision, the determination, and the desire to do it. And currently, politically, that is not there.
Fergal Sharkey, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you for all your messages as well this morning.